So I want to talk about today about how improving the structure, the edges, allows for the internal to develop, and how I'm going to use sound and silence as the main example, but I'm going to explore it in many different ways because it applies to other things. But being intentional with silence or with sound brings us to this idea that like the man is the voice, the woman is the speech, and it's like this force of sound is carried by its words, like the force of the wave is carried by the water. So it's like using our vocal expression in order to command is, we don't even need to say a word. You just say, ah, and someone hears you. And so it's this idea that it affects whether we're silent, and our silence can speak louder. If someone asks you a question and you totally ignore them, it's noticed. So the silence and the sound, the intentions, will actually have effects in many areas of life, and I'll explore a few. I'm going to compare a couple. Like, I'm going to take work and business. Like, what you make your business and what you're willing to put effort in is how you would define that. And then, communication and relationship, where it comes into a dynamic where it's back and forth, give and take. And also, like, obviously, to communicate, you need to unite. Relationship is about uniting. And obviously, business is what you make your energy about, and work is what you make your ethic, like what are you focused on giving, your productivity to. And then I'm going to also talk a little bit about how, like, the mindset and the creativity aspects of it, so like a more internal. So in all those areas, so there's like 3 paradigms here, but I'll first start with, in my class yesterday called Living Deeply, where we explore a verse from the Old Testament, and I got one that says, "Listen, O heavens, and I'll speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth." And we let it be the portal. We let it be the force of these words are a portal carrier for the force. So like these words are the carrier. For example, like I said, the feminine is the speech or the text, and the man is the voice or like the force. So we all have that inside of us. Each one of us has both, but we could also look at it as like a man's voice is usually deeper and more powerful, and women usually talk more. So it goes long. In other words, it has, many areas where it's relevant. But in this case, I was able to recognize that, and Brene Brown says, shame is not an effective tool of social justice. So for me, it's like, can my silence speak louder than my words? My intentions for talking and being heard are often counter to what I'm actually expressing or bringing into existence. In other words, it's not about reconciliation, it's about non-conciliation. Like, there's mixed messages. In other words, my voice does not match my action or my behavior. And it's like this denial that causes me to have an inner division. I'm not able to say what I'm seeking. I'm posturing as more certain because I want to prove my words are right, rather than not know what to say. And there's this idea that sentience comes from a sentence. So in Tanya, which is a book by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Hasidic movement called Lubavitch Chabad, or Chabad, whatever. Chabad is the acronym for the 3 major faculties of the mind, which is often translated as wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, but there are other ways of saying it. It could be that like flash of light, the idea, and then as it evolves, and then its actual form, like what it actually means in the real world, the actual interpretation. So we can kind of stretch these meanings of this, like a sentence can give us sentience because we can stretch it and live in the sentence. Like be kind could be a whole sentence of 2 words, but you could live in it and it lives in you. So how does that work? That means that let's say we're being embraced by something that's embracing us, right? So I will have my mind wrap up this sentence and let it be foundational inside of me, and then I will also be wrapped up by it. It will meet me in the world. So the sentience comes from the sentence. And a great way to think of that is like how in this past week's portion of the Old Testament, which is called the Torah, portion of Parshas Shlach. So Shlach means to send, and they sent out some spies to go check out the land, and they gave majority of them, it was 12, so 5/6 of them gave bad report, and that was a really big problem, and it caused a lot of bad effects because they couldn't see the good. So they were living in this fear because they wanted to make sure that they weren't just having faith that everything would be okay. There was huge, massive physical enemies, and the fruit itself was like, huge fruits. So we have to take a personal lesson from this. Now, first of all, I heard that the Meraglim, which means always usually translated as spies, is actually explorers or scouts. So we have to look at and this is how I'm applying it to myself, like my intentions. Am I exploring for the sake of finding something wrong so I could stay comfortable? Or am I exploring to learn something new? And this is like the idea of the silence and not speaking yet, not creating into existence as an explorer, but then being closed-minded and, saying that things are bad elsewhere, which is not true. The people who live there, it's good for them. So, and then the idea of the big fruit is like, lack, like it's too good to be true. It triggers, we're imposters and imposter syndrome, and we'll self-sabotage because there's no way that we want to actually get what we're supposed to get, because how could we handle it? It's too good to be true. So I really learned from these two aspects and relate to like the spies, but also I'm like learning from their mistake of not being a spy, being an explorer, not looking to find things wrong, like better to stay in my own little bubble, better to be self-will, but actually get out of myself and be a scout and, almost like more of like a messenger who's looking to find out information that's not necessarily good or bad. And in that way, like a friend of mine, when she's sure, she doesn't write things down and plan it out. I always have my notes and I'm ready, but she kind of says, let it be a free-for-all. I'm going to trust that I'm going to let people, I'm going to share what's true for me right now. And I'm going to let people form their own meaning and their own interpretation. And that's like what that sentence does, right? The sentence has its meaning and interpretation, and it becomes sentience. It becomes consciousness of what's real. So in this way, I would like to, personally, even myself, as I said, this listen, O heaven, and I'll speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth, using this to say when I am commanding the universe with my words to show me this interpretation and this meaning. If I can be more free, it's to say, I'm a little afraid that it's all too good to be true, or, I'm having trouble with feeling confident that I could handle these big potential enemies that I may come up against if I try to grow or if I try to get successful. So it's worth it to improve the structure, because the structure will allow for the internal developments. And in this way, I will be able to use, more intentional speech and more intentional silence, where I don't have to commit to certain words anymore. And that's really my practice, and that's how I can live more deeply. And then a friend of mine in the group said there's 11 shades of gray. There's at least 11 shades of gray. So, I talk often about the sphirot, the Kabbalistic spheres of faculties, and she said they're all grays. They're like all mixtures in some way, but even though they're pure, there's 11 shades of gray. The beginning of the beginning, the middle of the end, I mentioned this in a previous video, is all about these internal developments. And what we're speaking is developing our sentience. And so if I could explore without developing fear and come back home where it's safe without feeling like, even though it's smaller here and there's more, there's bigger enemies there, but there's also bigger rewards there, wherever there is, I can also bring that with me here and say, like, what do I really want? And can I become a better vessel for both handling the enemies and the blessings? So in other words, handling the curse and the blessing of growth, of development. You get from jiu-jitsu. I remember I got an orange green belt when I was studying in Israel. We had jiu-jitsu class. Like, you started at one, then you move to the next. Now, as you develop, the opponent gets stronger, but the benefits of winning, for example, get bigger. So that's an example. And now I'm going to talk about some applications of it. I'll start with work and business, which is the least personal. And I'm going to be comparing it to communication and relationships, but I'll kind of talk about them all together because we use a lot of the same skills. And I'm going to just, use this as an exercise to share freely. It's like a processing. So I'm going to improve my structure by talking about the structure in which I can grow and develop in these areas. I feel weak and submergible in employment. I feel dependent on the manager or boss and will accidentally try to please them or grow even to resent them. My perfectionism and meticulousness, however, are very valuable at work, but they can destroy a relationship or partnership. At work, I can usually hold myself with enough regard to not show my feelings where inappropriate and can separate my actual self from my work. But in relationships, I struggle not to share all my feelings, even when inappropriate, and have it as a challenge to separate my actual self from the connection. And finally, the last comment I'll say about communication relationships is as I improve my personal communication with a man or with my family, I get better at talking to all kinds of people with all different, power levels. And this helps me with work. Then with the creativity, mindset improvements, the way that I myself can look at it is spending time alone and spending time with people. This allows for more creativity in the silence, intentions, right? So you see what I'm saying here? It's like filling the intention with the silence or the sound for it to be the structure. The intention is something that becomes a sentence that I can actually get sentience from. Continuing, compartmentalizing or containers for parts of me to be free and open allows me to really, truly let go in those areas versus having to do it in a kind of unstructured way. I don't really even trust that I'll be able to handle the goodness or the badness. Being open to growth, hearing how I affect others. Criticism can have helpful guidance. I don't like criticism. I know most people don't. Sometimes I really will find myself twisting it around so that I could degrade the other person so I don't have to listen to what they're saying. So this is a big one. Routine and structure and timed periods. So this is having a discipline to be inside of schedule. Practicing breathing slowly and deeply. This is often hard for me when I'm in go mode, but that's not necessarily how it can help my mindset. I can't really access my intentions always when I'm in the action trying to act it out. Making an effort in my appearance. Sometimes I'm really not able to, I'm either going too far, too less, and I make an effort in my appearance to match the environment. Not chasing or desiring honor or glory in order to change and develop under the radar in some privacy. That's a big one for me. That's how I keep the private and have a good inner bond. And that's where my creativity comes from. Staying as comfortable as possible on the way. So in other words, I have a tendency to sort of get out of my body when I feel uncomfortable. And instead, I'm learning how to imagine I would treat my child, properly and with safe, reliable care. And it means okay, if you're thirsty, you don't have to just say let me push how long I could go without drinking so I could get my activities done before I reward myself with a drink. I would say, I would do better with all these activities if I had a drink of water. So that's kind of the difference. And of course, finally, practicing patience in the silence. And what does that mean for me is called waiting. And that means that I'm not going to get the answer I want right away, whether it's in work, I'm not going to get the email right away, whether, or I have to wait for the Venmo amount. If I don't want to pay a fee, I have to wait for it to transfer to my account. And with my family, it's my brother may tell me he's not reliable and I have to wait to see how else I could figure it out. In other words, just really learning how to be quiet in the wait without pushing, talking, and trying to push it into existence. So that is everything I have to share today. And I wish you well. Thank you for spending your time with me and wishing your improvement in structure so that you can have more internal development. And to have intentional silence, intentional sound that can affect your work, communication, relationship, business, and of course, mindset and creativity.